most coaches I talk to, if they start using this, like the warm up in this way, they do kind of say their players do find it a lot more fun, and like we're helping kind of players become more skillful at the same time. So like for me, it kind of seems like a win-win situation.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people.
Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Phillip O'Callaghan. Phillip is a PE teacher and tennis coach in Ireland. Phillip runs a newsletter for coaches that focuses on skill acquisition and practice design, in addition to sharing helpful content for coaches on his blog and Twitter. In part 2 of this 2-part conversation, we dive into improving the warm-up and teaching through principles of play. As always, if you'd like the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Phillip O'Callaghan. Enjoy the episode. All right, coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Coach Phillip O'Callaghan. Phillip, in the first part of the conversation, we dove into 4 principles of environment design, session intention, constrained to afford, representative learning design, and repetition without repetition. Coaches, if you haven't listened to that part of the conversation yet, I would highly recommend that you go do so. I want to talk now, Phillip, about what those things look like, even in more practical examples and in practical ways, and in parts of our practice specifically too. One of my favorite things that you shared recently was around improving the warm-up. And I think this is an untapped area for a lot of coaches that maybe we haven't given enough thought to, or maybe enough intentional thought. And it's a part of our practice that if we improve it, I think would benefit our athletes and our teams and their development. So I'll toss it over to you there to dive into what does it look like to improve the
Yeah, so
warm-up?
I suppose like the first thing, like I'd say is that like I suppose in the warm ups that I'd use, like decision making and problem solving are like at the heart of it. So like, you can still use like some of the, I suppose, like principles. I suppose one of the common ones would be ramp, is it? Like most coaches would have maybe heard of that, like raise your heart rate, um, activate your muscles, mobilize, potentiate. That's like a kind of common one. But like you can still do that by having like, I suppose, decision making at the heart of it. Another way, a nice way to think of it would like, some of you might have heard of the work of like Sean Michigan, Tyler Yeary, and like Emergence. They talk about like making it more alive. So that might be another way you'd use it. So like you're kind of alive means like it's full of problems. There's representative information present. So like that's kind of what we're doing to our warm up. So like the way I would generally conduct my own warm ups, so like I'd have a kind of little kind of heart raiser activity, but in that thing, like it would be lower intensity, so I'd make the area a lot smaller, because like if like the bigger the area, the more intense like the movements the players would be using. So like I'd really kind of reduce the area, and maybe like reduce the speed of the balls and stuff, but it would still be kind of quite game like. So like in tennis, we can get these, like I suppose one of the things I'd use would be like they'd have baby tennis balls, like they're big kind of soft kind of balls. You can't like hit them hard. So, and like they'd be playing maybe a mini game of tennis with those. So like they're still like, if we're looking like, say if you listen to the last episode, if we were talking about representative information, there's going to be an opponent, there's going to be a ball, they're going a direction, but it's a warm-up activity. Then like I suppose one or two of the thing, like I shared kind of 2 threads around the warm-up, and like one of them was like some of the comments were like, oh, what about like say the mobilize, or like kind of getting stretching and all that in, and like dynamic warm-ups and stuff. And then kind of that would be kind of where you go on to the next part. But like a lot of the things I do, again, like while it's not going to be like I'm going to have to scale down the representativeness an awful lot, I'll try to keep some of the key information. So like some of the things I do is like I'd say, if you're familiar with a tennis court, I'd have the two players in the service box. They have to, I tell them they have to move their opponent around the box. They might be in twos or threes. They throw the ball, and I'll say for the first maybe 30 seconds, the player has to catch the ball while lunging. The next one, they have to do it while squatting. The next one, they catch it and they have to do like one of those, I don't know, like they call it maybe Frankenstein's or like airplanes. So it's like for your hamstrings. Then I might go, okay, go to the nearest line, hop over and back 10 seconds, kind of do the ankle. So I suppose I still try to keep some of the, like there's a ball, there's an opponent. It's not fully representative, it's quite low, but like there's still decision making, bit of problem solving, and they're still warming up their body. So, and then the last activity, then after that would be something, usually would be an activity that's kind of based on the session intention, to get them kind of up to speed before going into the main kind of parts of the session. So that's where I suppose the planning and stuff comes in. Like we were kind of talking about in the last episode, having a clear kind of purpose or goal behind the activity. Like if it's again, it's just something a bit more and not quite as intense as, like it's still a warm up, but we're starting to kind of introduce some of the kind of maybe principles or etc. that we might be using throughout the session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll link it in the show notes for coaches that want to see it. But Philip did an awesome thread on improving the warm up that had a bunch of different examples of teams, cross levels, and a bunch of different sports. Uh, yeah, doing warm ups differently, and I think it's helpful for coaches to see, right? There's examples of soccer and basketball teams playing variations of tag, right? Where there's just tons of movement. And I'm like, man, that'd get me warm and ready for a practice, no doubt. And I think that it's helpful for coaches for us to see people do it differently, because often we just kind of do it the way that we experienced or do it the way that we've seen it done, and it can be really helpful to see it done a different way. And like you said, and doing our best within that warm up to keep it in some way, even if it's to a small level, representative of our sport and our game. And so oftentimes for me, what that looks like is if we're doing some sort of warm up activity, oftentimes everybody has a ball in their hand and there's dribbling going on, right? And oftentimes there's maybe it's a game of tag or some variation of it, but there's dribbling, right? They're dribbling, everybody's dribbling. There's kind of offense and defense within it. It's not exactly representative of the real game, but a lot of the things that are present in the real game are still present in what we're doing. And I think the other piece of it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, is usually or often these can just be more fun too.
It's
And I think that's important, like a warm up that is fun. That's how I
yeah.
wanna start my
I suppose
practice
like
off.
it's satisfying too, like big coaching needs. Like the players are having what I personally find is the players have so much more fun. Um, and I think you found that too. And like most coaches I talk to, if they start using this, like the warm up in this way, they do kind of say their players do find it a lot more fun. And like we're helping kind of players become more skillful at the same time. So like for me, it would be a kind of seems like a win-win situation. But I suppose like it can be I suppose like it can be maybe a small bit daunting for coaches maybe to start maybe even like making their warm-ups more alive and representative. But I think like even if like a coach wants to maybe start out with this, like if you've never maybe used some of these like ideas before, the warm-up might be even one of the best places to start.
Yeah, I agree, and there's one other thought that popped into my mind around the warm up, and I've seen some other coaches do it, and I just did it, I did it a couple years ago when I was coaching a youth team. Just kind of I was like, this is what I'm gonna do when they show up." And one of the things that I did with that team was once 2 people were there, I just said, "Hey, start playing one-on-one, and whenever someone else shows up, we just add them in." Right? So we had 2 different colors of pennies. Actually, I had 3. I had a 3rd color because sometimes we'd have an all-time offense. if there was an odd number of people, there was someone on all-time offense, and then everybody else, we just flip and alternate until everyone was at the practice, and I had, 8 to 10 kids there, and sometimes before I've even started playing, they've been playing 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5 for 8 to 10 minutes or longer, and they're warm, they're ready to go then, like, I just kind of organized it. They knew the routine too. They showed up and they got right into a game, and it kinda like you said, you talked about that ramp, like, by the end of that, like, they're ready to go, their heart rate's been going, they can kind of go they can go all out. Because I know as a coach sometimes too, it's if you try to hop right into a game or a segment of practice that you're know really needs some intention and work on, but they're not warm yet, sometimes it's not what you want it to be because their body's not activated yet, and so that was just a great way for me of, like, and this required very little from me. It was just, "Hey, organize into a game, start playing, and we'll warm up by playing the game." I don't know that's perfect. There's probably right, I don't know if there's one right way, but that was something that I found too, and I think especially depending on your level, can be a really effective way of just, "Hey, talk to them about it. When you guys show up, self-organize into a game. Teams won't always be even. You alternate when people show up, whatever. You guys can make it fair. There'll be odd numbers. We might have an all-time offense or all-time defense, but start playing and they'll get warm really quick doing that. And they'll have so much fun."
Yeah, and I suppose like
Uh,
sorry, I was just gonna say like
Go ahead.
before just like one other little thing is like doing kind of little games and stuff like that at the start of the warm up. It's kind of like I suppose like the street games and stuff like people may have played as kids, and like one of the kind of other like advantages of using it is like we're kind of like developing that love of the game. So like the players love playing the game. So like having little like we're not saying oh they're going to play 5-on-5, but like pick up basketball can be 1 against 1, it can be 2 against 1, it can be 3 against 2. Then there might be 3 against 3, but oh no, we're actually going to make it 4 against 2. Like there's so many different ways, and like a lot of the times the players are actually like by giving them the freedom to design the games, they actually come up with some really cool ones. Because like that's what we did when we were maybe kids on the street. If a team is winning by a lot, we try to make it fair and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool seeing the kind of examples kids and like even older players can come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes in practice, we'll just tell our guys, "Hey, split up teams evenly. Like, we're going in 60 seconds, figure out how to split these teams evenly." And they do it. They know it, you know? Yeah, I think like you said, sometimes we don't give our athletes enough opportunity to be creative and to do the things that some of us grew up doing. I wanna talk now about, uh, teaching through principles of play. I know this is something you've shared some stuff on as well, and I think that if you're if you're wanting to adopt a constraints-led approach, that this is a key piece of it, in my opinion. Will you talk about what that means, teaching through principles of play? What does that mean? And then we can talk about what
Yeah,
it looks
so I
like.
suppose like if we want to kind of I suppose I'll give a quick insight into maybe principles of play first, and then we can go into the teaching through it. So like the way I'd view principles of play is and like they're kind of like the overarching strategies kind of like you use to win the game. So like the goal of everyone is to try win the game. Some people might want to draw, or if you're in the NFL or NBA, lose to get a draft pick, but we won't get into that. Um, but everyone's goal is nearly to win the game. So like in tennis, you win by either moving your opponent around the court to make them make a mistake or hitting a winner. So like all the principles are going to be like based around that. So like principles of play that I would use a bit would be like how can we drag our opponents wide, like move them to the side? How can we use the depth of the court? How can we drag them forward, maybe? And I suppose the nice thing about using principles is they don't like prescribe specific actions to them. So like there's lots of different ways that you can push your opponent back. And like there some might be more effective in different scenarios than the other. Um like if you're playing basketball, there might be different ways that you um I suppose maneuver the defense around to create space. So like a principle of playing defense would be kind of like a lot of the time they defend narrow because they want to defend like the areas where it's easiest to score from. So like then the opposite. for the attack is like you want to stretch the space to make the defender spread out, so you can it's easier for the attackers to score. So that's where the principles, that's where like teaching through principles is like we might focus on maybe a specific principle, and like what it allows is it allows like the players to still be adaptable and creative within that principle. So like I suppose that principle maybe acts as a constraint. So like it would like I suppose constrain the information they're looking for, but within that they have freedom to act. So that's why I suppose we'd use principles rather than, I suppose the opposite would be maybe game models, where like there are specific actions, like you need to do this. Like when you have the ball, you do this. Whereas like we're allowing our athletes to be more, or players to be more creative and have more freedom when they're playing.
That's good. That's helpful. Talking about those principles, will you talk more about what it can look like and maybe share some examples about how can we then use constraints to encourage these principles of play to emerge, or to help, like we talked about in part one, help our athletes explore the skills that will help them succeed in these
Yeah,
principles?
so like I suppose I'll try to give some like real life examples. I think that's probably maybe the best way to do it. So like um in like say I'm a PE teacher as well, so like I try to teach PE using a lot of these. So like um maybe if you're like, say a simple example I'll maybe give, like say one I've used in PE recently was like, say badminton or tennis. So like it would be kind of similar. So like if you like say drag your opponent off the court, and then then like say they step outside the sideline, and then you end up winning the point, you'd give bonus points, or like you're constraining to a forward. Like a lot of it would be through like scoring and stuff, which is why scoring is kind of important for coaches. If you're looking at, say, um I don't know, maybe go back to basketball. um like say if you want to work on helping the players maybe create space, like if it's something they're struggling with, again you might go, there's three attackers, two defenders, get someone free, and like reward maybe if you get a shot off when the player is free, they get bonus points for it. So they're looking for those opportunities to like use the principle. So that's where like I suppose using constraints, you could also maybe like, if you want to, like what would be another example and a good one. So like if you want to, I suppose like in tennis, like taking the opponent's time away might be a principle. Like you want to, so like a lot of that time you'd want to get to the net, and you'd want to be volleying. So like you could maybe reward getting to the net with 3 points again, or like you can maybe start them up the court, so like they're more inclined to have to go to the net. So like again, you're kind of creating little slices. You're using constraints to maybe exaggerate certain problems, or to reward them for exploring those problems. And then you're kind of like, I suppose, manipulating your session design, maybe using those environmental design principles to like work on what you want to do. So like I suppose it's very important for like then coaches to observe how the players are interacting with the problems. And like if it's too hard, you do something maybe called like scaling, so you make the problem easier. If it's too easy and they're achieving like success, you make it harder. So that's, I suppose, how I'd go about maybe coaching through principles, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. Some helpful examples there as well. And I love the idea where you talked about, yeah, hey, if you in tennis, if you move your player outside the lines and then you win that point, it's bonus or it's double. And so now all of a sudden they're thinking, okay, how do I move them in this way? And then, right, it's gonna make it easier for them to hit a winner if they have accomplished that first. And then they're gonna incentivize it to allow them to win. You mentioned it in your answer there, and it was one of the things I actually wanted to talk about. You said why it's important for coaches to score things and to keep score. Will you talk to me about why you believe it's so important for coaches to keep score in
Yeah, I
practice?
suppose it's like, if a kind of a funny example is like in when I'm coaching, like sometimes like in some groups I have, like there would have been like a kind of big difference in the levels of the players. Like what I found is like when I gave like scoring rules to like the better players, they were all really competitive and they kept the score, and like because they were getting bonus points, they were really looking for it. Whereas then like I could go down to somebody, like say there was 8 courts, so I'd be walking through them all. I'd go down to maybe like courts where like the players were maybe at the lower level, and I'd ask them what the score is and they'd have no idea. And like it kind of defeated the whole purpose of the game, because like we were rewarding them for doing something but they weren't like keeping track of their score. So like then it was hard for me to see if they were actually doing it or not. I suppose like why the score is important is that like it a lot of the time it makes the game realistic. Sometimes like it kind of adds pressure a small bit, so like the score does have a big influence on the way players are going to behave. So like if you're close game, 2 minutes left on the clock, there's going to be a bit of pressure. Or like the score in tennis, if it's like if your break point down, there's going to be a lot of pressure on you, or if your set point down, there's pressure on you. So I suppose what we're trying to do is we're trying to get like make the players just get a bit more comfortable in being uncomfortable in those situations, and that's kind of one way we can do it in practice, is by like having the score presence.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And I've just found it makes my practices so much more competitive. Kids want to win. That's a good thing. The game is competitive. We should keep score in our practices. One of the other things I'll often do is I keep track of winners and losers off. Right. Now this is context dependent and
Yeah.
if you can do that and if it's right for you, but that's just motivating. It brings out the best in us when there's a score and we're keeping track and kids wanna know, and practices are better when everyone is bringing their best, when there's that high level of competition and effort from
Yeah, I do
everybody
kind of something
involved.
similar
Do you have
to
another
that.
thought on that?
I think like it's something coaches might be able to use, or like a kind of practical thing is like I kind of keep track of like say the winners or losers in like the specific games, and like give them points and have a leaderboard. And then like the bottom two, sometimes like I'd make them maybe like sing a song for 20 seconds or something like that, just to kind of like something they might want to do. And then but then the next week they keep their points and everyone else goes back to zero. So it kind of like, so then they have a bit of an advantage. So it's likely they won't be in the bottom two the next time. They might still, but like a lot of the time they're not. So like, and then there's going to be a new bottom two. So like it kind of builds the pressure a small bit on everyone in a fun way. Like I wouldn't use like physical punishments, like, oh, the losers have to do like 100 push-ups or something like that, or anything like that, but just kind of have something fun that you know that they might like to do, or it might just be a small little inconvenience for them, and it just adds a little bit. Yeah,
That's a great idea. Yeah. I said, yeah, make them
yeah,
make them dance for 15 or 20 seconds, like something
yeah,
something funny too, that kinda creates your
yeah.
culture and connection, like create some memories there. Oh, that's good. I like that. Well, Philip, this has been awesome. Before we wrap it up, I just want to ask you three quick rapid fire questions and know the first thing that comes into your mind. The first one is the most fun part of coaching is
Um, I actually really enjoy like designing activities and like seeing like how the players are like interacting with them, and then like I love when it's kind of like frustrating them slightly, and you're like, okay, that's I know I've got it right here. And like when you get to know the players, like they'll start maybe smiling at you. They know what you're doing after a while, so I think I kind of enjoy that bit.
yeah, it's that moment where you've created the
Yeah,
struggle that they need to grow and they might not like it, but
yeah.
they know it too. That's good. I love that. Here's the next one. I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
Um, I wish I would have known that, like, I suppose building relationships and stuff with the players is probably like the most important thing you can do when you're first interacting with them. So, like, um, by having those like positive relationships and stuff, then like if you don't have those relationships, all the kind of skill acquisition, all that stuff doesn't really matter.
That's so true. I'm glad you shared that. That's so good. We can talk all we want about theory and practice, but if the athletes that you coach don't believe that you care about them, a lot of this won't matter. Last rapid fire question. I know I'm successful as a coach when
When players are having fun, they're coming back, and like I suppose they I suppose they love playing. They keep playing outside of your coaching. Like you might coach them once a week, but like they're engaging in the sport. They like I suppose again like you have a good relationship with them, so like you can maybe have a bit of fun with them during a session, and they're getting better.
That's good. Yeah, I love it. Love how you finished it too. Well, Phillip, this has been fantastic. Before we hop off, share with people where they can connect with you and learn more about the work you're doing or subscribe to your newsletter, anything
Yeah,
like that.
so I suppose like I started sharing stuff on Twitter over the last maybe year and a half. My page was called or is called like my handle is Mr. Tennis Coach, but like my name is just Phillip O'Callaghan. I tried to kind of tried to share stuff most days and kind of do threads maybe at the weekend. And then I have a newsletter that I send out every Friday. It's just a kind of like I suppose it's only about a 5 minute read, I think. But it has kind of 5 different elements. It has like a research insight, a podcast episode, a tweet, a quote, and a resource. Are kind of the 5 headlines, and it's just all kind of related to skill acquisition. And it's just, I suppose, designed to make it more accessible for coaches because I know it can be a bit challenging.
I love it. Well, Phillip, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate
Yeah,
all
thanks
that you
very much
shared
for
today.
having me. And if any of the listeners like do want to reach out, don't be afraid to message me or whatever on Twitter. I'm kind of happy to answer any questions. Sorry.
No, you're good. That was my error there. That was my error there. Will you try
Yeah.
that one more time? Because that
Yeah, I
audio
was
may
just
play over it.
I suppose like if any coaches do have any questions or want to maybe learn more, like I'm happy to like answer any messages or whatever on Twitter. So like if you DM me, I mightn't see it straight away, but I'll see it within a day or two, and or email me and I'll get back to you as quick as I can.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Phillip for joining me. You can find links to connect with Phillip and his work in the show details. And don't forget to check out the show details if you'd like to get access to the free podcast notes in this episode or any episode of the podcast. You can also learn more about how we serve coaches. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week.